Good morning, everyone. We are reporter number 9, and we are now discussing chapter 14 titled Philippine American War from 1899 to 1902. The reporters for this chapter are Allyn Macasilhig, yours truly, and Miss Casuloc.an. I will now start the discussion and to be continued by Miss Casuloc.an. Okay, so first, contrary to the expectations of the Americans, the occupation of the Philippines and its control took more time and violence to accomplish. The Filipinos, though lacking in arms and munitions, fought valiantly throughout the country. As Mariano Santos, a veteran of the Revolution of 1896 and the Philippine-American War, recalled when interviewed in 1976 at age 101. So, niingon si Mariano Santos, nang dumating ang mga Amerikano, tubig lang at lupa ang hindi nila dala. Armas, pagkain, gamot, kasuotan, mga kabayo at bagol, halos lahat na. But he quickly added, ngunit hindi kami natakot sa kanila. Nasindak lang sa kanilang dami at armas. Matatapang ang mga Pilipino noon. So despite nga pag-abot diri sa mga Amerikano, daghan na kay silang gidala nga armas, wala gihapon ni give up ang mga Pilipino and still naara gihapon sila hope and still ila gihapon gipaglaban ang Philippines. So next, the United States colonial motives in the Philippines were economic, politico-military, and religious. Aguinaldo and the Revolutionary Army in Malolos, who had already accepted American control, prepared for war. The Filipinos were humiliated in the face of a fully equipped and trained army for conventional warfare. However, the Filipinos successfully maintained the resistance through guerrilla warfare. To end the war, the United States used repressive and violent measures such as water cure, reconcentration, and scorched earth tactics. Threatened by starvation and war-related diseases, the people opted for peace. So, ang mga motive di ay sa United States diri sa Philippines kay economic, politico-military, and religious. And pag-end sa war, ang United States nigamit sila og mga repressive and violent measures, pareha ng water cure, reconcentration, og scorched earth tactics. So next. So we have here the Benevolent Assimilation Proclamation. So kaning Benevolent Assimilation Proclamation gigaman ni siya ni President McKinley. Okay, so let's proceed. Before the signing of the Treaty of Paris, so President McKinley said he did not know what to do with the Philippines. He added that one night he fell on his knees to pray to God to enlighten him on what to do with the Philippines. But he was surrounded by men who had interest in making the Philippines an American colony. So ganahan sila nga mahimo ang Philippines nga kolonya sa Amerika. So these men representing pressure groups were tulo ni sila kabuok. Una, the American business, whose interest included the Philippines not as only the market for American products but also a stepping stone to Asia's markets. Ikaduha, ang military and naval pressure group. Maganahan sila nga ang Philippines mahimong base for American ships and as first line of defense. And last, the religious pressure group. Maganahan pud sila nga mahimo ang Philippines nga base for Protestant missionaries. So all these pressure groups work hard to make the Philippines an American colony. So ganahan gud kay sila nga mahimong American colony ang Philippines kay daghan silang motives sa Pilipinas. So next. After the signing of the Treaty of Paris, so ang Treaty of Paris di ay, kay muna siya ang Treaty of Peace between United States of America and the Kingdom of Spain. So human nga pag-sign ni President McKinley sa Treaty of Paris, ni-issue siya sa so-called Benevolent Assimilation Proclamation. For the first time, he officially announced the American policy regarding the Philippines. So it clearly indicated the intention of the United States to exercise sovereignty over the entire Philippines, making it a United States colony. At the same time, the proclamation ordered the American military commanders in the Philippines to extend nila ang American sovereignty over the entire archipelago by force. So, ilang extend ang ilang American sovereignty sa whole archipelago sa Philippines by force. So, General Elwell Otis, who succeeded General Merritt, did not publish the full text of McKinley's proclamation. Wala niya gi-publish ang whole jud nga text ni McKinley kay nahadlok siya nga basin og mangisog ang mga Filipino unya nanap niya war. So instead, he changed some word to soften the language of the proclamation so as not to antagonize the people. So iyahang gipang-usob ang uban nga mga gipang-ingon ni McKinley nga haron mahimo siyang dili kaayo malain ang Pilipino sa text. So next, Filipino reaction to the proclamation. Mao ni siya ang unsay reaction sa mga Filipino sa proclamation nga gigama ni President McKinley. Unfortunately for General Otis, General Marcos P. Miller, who was in Iloilo, published the original text of the proclamation. Copies of this unchanged version fell into the hands of the Filipinos. So, wala nahatag di ay itong unchanged, wala nahatag tong giusob nga text ni General Otis kay ang nahatag nga text dito sa Filipinos kay katong gigama ni General Marcos P. Miller. Ang gipublish ni General Marcos P. Miller kay katudjong original text nga giingon ni McKinley. So next, Antonio Luna, editor of La Independencia, attacked the proclamation severely and said it was a trick to make Filipino people quiet. Later, Luna added that the Americans would put into practice what the Spaniards had done in the Philippines. So mahadlok si Antonio Luna nga mahitabo na pudtong gibuhat sa Spaniards sa una diri sa Philippines. So, on January 5, 1899, Aguinaldo issued a strongly worded proclamation saying that my government is disposed to open hostilities if the American troops attempt to take forcible possession of the Visayan Islands. Otis, realizing the meaning of Aguinaldo's proclamation, quietly strengthened the American lines as the Filipino-American relations entered a critical stage. So next, we have here attempts to relax the tension. So ganahan sila nga ma-relax ang tension haron dili magkaroon og war. So Aguinaldo knew very well that a war with the United States would bring hardship and suffering to the people. He tried to relax the tension by suggesting to Otis that the representative should meet to discuss ways and means of avoiding a conflict. So si Aguinaldo, ni-suggest siya ni General Otis nga mag-meet ang both sides kay haron maistoryahan kabahin aning proclamation. Consequently, Otis appointed his representatives, which were composed of 3 military officers. Aguinaldo also appointed his 3 representatives. The six representatives met for almost a month in January, but nothing came out of the meetings because the American representatives were stalling, which heightened the tension of the two panels. The Filipino military officers believed that the Americans were only fooling the Filipinos and that they were not interested in keeping the Filipino-American diplomatic relations. So, nag-meet na ang unong ka-representatives pero wala ra gihapoy na hitabo. So, next. The shot that started the war. So, mauni siya ang hinungdan nga nganong gasugod ang war between the Philippine and the American. So first, some incidents which were originally minor in themselves because in the face of mounting tensions between two people. On February 1, 1899, a group of American engineers was arrested by Filipino troops. Otis protested, but Aguinaldo replied that the Americans were not arrested but merely detained because they were found within the Filipino lines. On February 2 pod, 1899, General Arthur or MacArthur protested the presence of some Filipino soldiers within the American lines. The Filipino withdrew and MacArthur was satisfied. So, next, on the night of February 4, 1899, Private Willie W. Grayson shot a Filipino soldier on the corner of Sosiego and Silencio streets in Santa Mesa, Manila. The Filipinos answered with fire and the American-Filipino War was on. Within an hour, all American units were effectively deployed and mobilized throughout Manila and the suburbs. So, mauni siya hinungdan nganong nagkaroon og war between Philippine and the American. Next. The incident investigated. So, giimbestigahan ang nahitabo. That night, Captain Fernando Gray sent a telegram to Malolos saying that the Americans had commenced hostilities. The Filipino commander of the sector where the firing started was in Malolos, together with the officers attending a dance. So Aguinaldo sent an emissary to inform Otis that the firing on our side the night before had been against my order. But Otis, haughty and arrogant, said that the fighting having started must go on to the grim end. Aguinaldo, wanting to know how the incident happened, ordered an investigation to determine the truth. Subsequent investigations showed that even as early as February 2 and 3, the Filipino employees in the service of the American ships had been dismissed. That in the morning of February 4, between 200 and 300 American soldiers boarded two cascos for Cavite. Next. Later, it was learned that the soldiers returned to join their units. It was also noted during the investigation that the sudden attack by the Americans in all sectors showed that they are preparing for an offensive against the Filipinos. On the other hand, the American commander Otis did not attempt to make an investigation. Instead, he ordered an all-out attack against the Filipino troops everywhere. So si Aguinaldo natingala siya ato nga panghitabo, so ni-conduct siya og investigation. Meanwhile, si General Otis wala gud siya ni attempt nga maghimo og any investigation. Instead, ni order siya direkta sa iyahang troop nga maghimo og all-out attack against the Filipino troops everywhere. Next. The American drive to the north. Because of their advanced preparations and superior arms, the American troops easily captured town after town in what is now the Rizal province. Earlier, in the north of Manila, the Americans won victories in the Battle of La Loma near the Chinese cemetery where Major Jose Torres Bugalion died in combat. With La Loma in his hands, MacArthur proceeded to Caloocan where he was met by General Antonio Luna's force. In the battle that ensued, Luna was defeated. The superior arms of the Americans could not be neutralized by bravery and courage alone. Luna then planned to recapture Manila. On March 22, he led the attack on the city. 2 days later, he reached the Ascagara Street. The Americans, realizing the significance of Luna's victory in the center, fought hard and succeeded in forcing the intrepid Antonio Luna to retreat to Pulo, Bulacan. So, ang mga Americans, sige sila kadaog ani na time kay naaman sila mga advanced preparations and superior arms. Then ang mga Pilipino, kuan ra ba lang mga gamit dili kaayo, dili wala sila yung mga advanced nga mga gamit nga magamit nila in order nga makadaog sila. So, nagplano si Antonio Luna og unsa ilang buhaton haron makuha nila ang Manila. So next, American reinforcements arrived in February and March. Otis took the offensive in the north while General Henry Lawton started an offensive in the south. In a few days, Pulo fell into the Americans and by March 30 they were at the door of Malolos. Meanwhile, Aguinaldo evacuated to Malolos and transferred the capital to San Isidro, Nueva Ecija. Otis ordered to MacArthur to rest in Malolos, while Lawton is ordered to continue his offensive against Cavite. So the Filipinos had very few victories, but these victories were costly to the Americans. On March 25, the Filipino troops repulsed General Lloyd Wheaton in the Battle of Pulo and killed an American colonel. In Kinga, now Plaridel, Major Bell of the American cavalry was killed in combat with the troops led by Boy, General or Gregorio del Pilar. In a battle fought in April 23, General Stottenberg was killed. On December 18 pod, General Licerio Hieronymus Group defeated the Americans under General Lawton in the Battle of San Mateo. General Lawton was killed in the battle. So gamay ra ang mga nadag-an sa mga Filipinos. Pero kaning mga daog sa mga Filipinos, costly na ni kayo sa mga Americans kay advanced biya ka ilang equipment unya nakadaog pa ang mga Pilipino. So daghan nga mga nangamatay ani nga panghitabo sa war between Philippine and American parihan ni General Lawton, parihan ni General Stottenberg. So daghan pa. Next, the Battle of Bagbag. Okay, so the capture of Malolos by MacArthur led General Luna to retreat farther north to Luzon. He established his headquarters in Calumpit, the town immediately north of Malolos. So dito na. Here he prepared his defenses against the American who were pursuing him. Luna sent a telegram to General Tomas Mascardo in Guagua asking for reinforcements. Mascardo was under Luna's jurisdiction, refused. This angered Luna and ordered his officers to leave for Guagua to punish Mascardo. He brought him with the artillery units, the cavalry, and the units of the infantry. During Luna's absence, General Gregorio del Pilar commanded the sector at Bagbag, Abarrio at Calumpit. The Americans swarmed all over the place and defeated del Pilar. So diri sa the Battle of Bagbag ang nakadaog ani ang mga Americans. Kay ni sent og telegram si Antonio Luna didto ni General Tomas Mascardo nga mangayo siya reinforcements, pero ni refuse si General Tomas Mascardo. Naglagot ni si Luna ani na time, and iyang giorder iyang mga officers nga biyaan ang guagwa haron i-punish si General Mascardo. So, kay wala man si Antonio Luna that time, si General Gregorio del Pilar ang nipuli og iyang gi-commanded ang sektor dira sa Bagbag. Unya, kaso lang napildi lang gihapon sila sa Americans. So next. When Luna returned to Calumpit at twilight, the Americans had already captured a large portion of the town. Luna retreated farther north to Pampanga and made preparation to meet the advancing enemy. So pagbalik ni Luna dito sa Calumpit, nakita niya nga ang Americans halos ma-occupy na nila ang large portion sa Bagbag. So ni-retreat na lang sila paingon sa north. Dayon, dito sila naghimo og preparation kay haron i-defeat na pod ang muadto nga enemy nila. So, next. So next is the fall of Mabini cabinet. Mabini is the next most powerful man in the country after Aguinaldo. He was president of the cabinet, and as such, he was prime minister. He was also a secretary of foreign affairs. Aguinaldo depended on him because he was honest, hardworking, and incorruptible. He never used his position to enrich himself in office. He was poor when he entered the government service. He was also poor, very poor when he died. When the Americans tried to win over the Filipinos by promising them freedom and autonomy, Mabini said this was the trick of the enemy. He was for the independence of the Philippines. He would not accept anything less than independence. However, his enemies like Pedro A. Paterno, Ambrosio Rianzares Bautista, Felipe Buencamino, and many others who belonged to the wealthy and the powerful opposed him. So si Mabini ang next most powerful man in the country sa una after ni Aguinaldo. Pero usa siya ka-honest, hardworking, and incorruptible. Wala niya gigamit ang iyang position to enrich himself. So wala niya nagigamit haron makapadato niya. He was poor when he entered the government service o pobre gihapon siya tung namatay siya. So, however, when the Americans tried to win over the Filipinos by promising them, so ni-promise ang mga Americans og freedom og autonomy sa Filipinos. Wala ni tuo si Mabini ana kay trick ra kuno to sa enemy. Pero ang iyang mga enemies nga pareha ni Pedro A. Paterno, Ambrosio Rianzares Bautista, Felipe Buencamino, daghan pa nga nabilong sa mga wealthy ug sa powerful, wala siya tuuhi or niadto sa pika side. So, they believed that the autonomy would be good to Filipinos. They accepted the American offer of autonomy. So, ilang gi-accept ang offer sa American nga freedom and autonomy. Since the group knew that Mabini was opposed to their view, they persuaded Aguinaldo to remove Mabini from office. So, ilang gi-persuade si Aguinaldo nga i-remove si Mabini sa ilahang office. On May 7, Aguinaldo informed Mabini that Paterno's for forming a new cabinet. Mabini knew what it meant. So, kay nisalig man si Aguinaldo ni Mabini kay honest man siya unya hardworking, the incorruptible. Ni-inform ni Aguinaldo si Mabini nga nag-form si Paterno og new cabinet. So he sent in the resignation of the entire cabinet he was heading. Mabini spent his last years in his armchair writing articles against the Americans and his memoir of the Philippine struggle for independence. So si Mabini ni-resign na lang siya sa entire cabinet and iyang gispent iyang last years in his armchair writing article against sa Americans. And next, the assassination of Luna. So, General Antonio Luna, as I said, was the most brilliant among the military officers. Siya ang pinaka-bright sa tanan ng military officers. Belonging to an educated and wealthy family of Ilocos Norte, Luna, however, was born in Manila, in the district now known as San Nicolas. He studied pharmacy in Manila and in Spain, where he identified himself with a propagandist. He was also a good writer in Spanish. He had one defect which the members of the Luna family have in common. He was short-tempered. He was exiled to Spain by the colonial government and on his way back to the Philippines in 1898, he passed by Hong Kong. He asked Felipe Agoncillo, a family friend, to give him a letter of recommendation for General Aguinaldo. Agoncillo gave him the necessary recommendation and a revolver. Aguinaldo recognized his brilliance and appointed him to a high position in the army. So General Antonio Luna, educated na siya and nabilong siya sa wealthy family sa Ilocos Norte. However, dito na siya gipanganak sa Manila, sa district nga karon kay gitawag na siya og San Lucas. Nag-study po na siya pharmacy sa Manila og sa Spain, dayon good writer pod na siya. So daghan na kayo na siyang mga achievements si General Antonio Luna. Munang pagkabalo ni General Aguinaldo ana kay girecommend ni Felipe Agoncillo si General Antonio Luna ni General Aguinaldo. So pagkabalo niya ana, iya dayon gi-appoint si General Antonio Luna sa high position in the army. Luna saw that the army had no discipline. Luna saw that it had no discipline in the army, but the common soldiers, particularly the Kawit regiment, did not like him. For they refused to take orders from him. When the Filipino-American War broke out, Luna was the chief of the military zone that included many provinces of central Luzon. He made many enemies because of his short temper. He slapped Felipe Buencamino, Aguinaldo's Secretary of Foreign Affairs, who disagreed with his strong opposition to any negotiation of compromise with the Americans. He also used to slap soldiers due to their inefficiency or if they failed to meet his standard. While he was in Bayambang, Pangasinan, inspecting the defenses against the advancing Americans, he received a telegram from Cabanatuan saying he was wanted there. So he went there with his aide, Colonel Francisco Roman, and some soldiers. So si Luna, naapod siya usa ka batasan nga short temper siya. Daghan kaayo siyang mga enemies tungod ana. Iyang gislap si Felipe Buencamino nga Secretary of Foreign Affairs ni Aguinaldo. Iya pong gislap ang uban nga soldiers nga kanang ni failed nga mo-meet sa iyang standards kay lagi naa siya short temper. Unya, one day nga di na siya dito sa Bayambang Pangasinan, nag-inspect sa mga defenses ba against sa advancing Americans, naka-receive man siya og telegram gikan sa kabanatuan nga gaingon nga wanted kuno siya dito. So niadto siya dito kauban ng iyang aide nga si Colonel Francisco Roman og ang uban nga mga soldiers. So when he reached Aguinaldo's headquarters in Cabanatuan on June 5, 1899, and he did not find the president there, he got angry. Then he heard a rifle shot, rushed downstairs, cursed the soldiers, and slapped one of them. A captain named Pendon Castilla for Cavite hacked Luna with a bolo. The other soldiers, seeing that he was wounded, started hacking him as well as with their bolos. Some even fired gunshots at him. Luna drew his revolver but fell outside the convent and died, saying, "Cowards! Assassins!" He died with more than 40 wounds in his body and head. So, gi-assassinate siya dito sa Cabanatuan. Kay pag-adto niya dito sa headquarters ni Aguinaldo, wala man ang president dito, so galagot siya. Dayon nakadungog siya og rifle shot din, niadto siya sa ilalom. Unya, pagkakita niya, iyang gi-slap ang usa ka soldier kay ngano kuno nagpabuto dito. Then a captain named Pendon Castilla for Cavite, dito na gikuan si Luna sa usa ka bolo. Pagkakita sa uban nga soldiers nga galagot pod niya kay tungod dili siya ganahan, then tungod kay short-tempered siya, unya napasakitan sila ni Luna, gihak pod siya og bolo. Then ang uban pod gi-fired siya og gunshots. So hangtod sa namatay siya, saying, "Cowards, assassin." So namatay siya with more than 40 wounds nga naa sa iyahang body ug sa iyahang ulo. So next is the conquest of the Visayas. So this topic will be until the end will be discussed by Miss Casuloc.an. So Miss Casuloc.an.
So, good day everyone. So now I will tackle the conquest of the Visayas. Meanwhile, Otis instructed Miller to invade Iloilo. So Miller's demand that Filipino troops surrender, the Visayas patriots under the leadership of General Martin Delgado decided to fight instead. To prevent the enemy from capturing the city, Delgado ordered his men to burn it. The Americans landed with full force, and on February 20, 1899, Haro fell, followed by Santa Barbara, Oton, and Mandurriao. So these four places in Iloilo are so near to each other, or duol ra sila. So kani nga mga places is so very historical during the Americans and Filipino time war. With Iloilo in their hands, the Americans sent an expeditionary force to Cebu, and on February 22, the city surrendered the enemy. The Cebu patriots, however, did not give up the fight so easily. They resorted to guerrilla warfare under the command of General Arcadio, Macasilhig, and Leonardo Folon. It took some time and much effort for the Americans to completely subdue the brave Cebuanos. Meanwhile, in Negros, many wealthy Negrenses sympathized with the Americans. When the enemy came, they raised the American flag. A committee composed of prominent Negrenses was sent to Manila to ask General Otis to allow them to arm a battalion to maintain peace and order. Otis approved the petition, for it was an unusual act of collaboration with Americans. On March 1, Otis issued an order providing for the creation of military district to include Panay, Negros, and Cebu. So, ang Panay og Negros and Cebu is so familiar gini sila gud sige ang masakop dayon nga una. So this was known as the Visayan Military District. The Negrenses were allowed to meet in the convention to frame a constitution. Known as the Negros Constitution, it was submitted to President McKinley for approval. The American president, however, did not take it seriously and nothing came out of it. So next is the Bates Treaty. Upon learning the Spaniards failed to completely subjugate the Muslim, the Americans dealt with them in a diplomatic way in order to neutralize their offensives. General John C. Bates tried to win the friendship of Muslims by negotiating with them and treating them as equals. The Sultan of Hulu Dato Karam insisted that the Americans must not be allowed to occupy any parts of Sulu except the town of proper of Hulu. Furthermore, sultans insisted in collecting customs duties in places that were not occupied by the Americans. Thus, on August 20, 1899, an agreement was signed by General Bates representing the United States and the Sultan of Hulu and his datus representing the Solo Sultanate. Known as the Bates Treaty, it provides the sovereignty of the United States over the whole archipelago of Sulu and its dependencies in declare acknowledge and that the rights and dignities of His Highness the Sultan and his datus shall be fully respected. However, the Americans promised not to interfere in religious matters and not to persecute anybody on account of his religious belief. The Americans also agreed to pay the sultans and his leading datus monthly salaries. So naghimo sila agreement mo ang pagmayad kang monthly salaries. With the neutralization of the Muslim, the Americans proceed with the so-called pacification of the Christian areas of the Philippines. So next is Aguinaldo retreat to Palanan. With the death of General Luna, many Filipino field commanders were demoralized. A number of Aguinaldo's generals surrendered to the enemy. This development led Otis to make plan to interrupt Aguinaldo, the recognized leader of the Filipino people, and his army. Aguinaldo, on the other hand, seeing the collapse of his regular army, ordered his troops and the people to conduct guerrilla warfare against the enemy, which was expected to be more effective than conventional warfare during that time. The Americans who were not familiar with the local terrain and not used to the tropical climate would be put to a great disadvantage with this tactic. Meanwhile, Aguinaldo, together with some selected men, his son, wife, mother, and sister, fled to Pangasinan. The Americans followed him and tried to catch him, but they failed because people warned him about approaching Americans. People were cooperative. They contribute money, food, and other supplies to Revolutionary Army. Determined not to capture, Aguinaldo walked from town to town with very little rest. So, sige siya, glakawag. Hinigamay ragod iyang na rest kay concern siya. Later, he left his family behind in order to spare them from the hardship of traveling on foot over rivers, valleys, mountains, and streams. Aguinaldo and a handful of faithful followers walked to Terra Virgen, Cagayan. On September 6, 19,000, he and his men reached the Palanan, Isabela, where he established his headquarters. So, sa September 6 ang nakaabot siya Palanan, tapos dito sa Isabela siya nag-establish og iyahang headquarters. So, next is the Battle of Pasong Terad. While fleeing the Americans, Aguinaldo reached the mountain province. He ordered his trusted general Gregorio del Pilar to remain behind as they continued to advance. Del Pilar was to intercept the Americans who were tracking them. This would Aguinaldo sufficient time to widen the distance between him and pursuing Americans. Del Pilar, after the departure of Aguinaldo, chose to delay the enemy of Pasong Terad, a narrow pass of 4,500 feet high where he had a good view of surrounding country. there was only one trail leading to it. So narrow was the trail not only one man at a time could climb it. So, nagama siya trail nga usara ang maka-climb one at a time. It was in a place that Del Pilar and 60 loyal soldiers positioned themselves. The American troop positioned under the Major Peyton march pursued Aguinaldo. Aguinaldo, in the morning of December 2, 1899, marched and his well-armed men proceeds toward the Del Pilar's position. The Filipinos, regarding the narrow pass, fired at the Americans who had no recourse but to retreat. Unfortunately, an egret guided the Americans to a secret trail leading to Del Pilar's men. The Americans slowly and quietly went up the trail and surprised the Filipino stroke. So, ang igorot ang nag-guide sa American sa secret nga trail. So, hindak pa nakibalaan. So, a fierce battle was ensued and Del Pilar was killed by the bullet has passed through his neck. So, napatay siya. Naigo sa iyang liog. So, the American soldiers rushed to the dead body of the young general and looted his personal belongings for souvenirs. The Americans left the body there and for 2 days remained unburied. On the third day, the egrets burned his remains in a shallow grave. So next is the stage of guerrilla warfare. Aguinaldo was no longer an effective leader at his stage of the war. Instead, local military leaders sustained the war. So, local military na lang ang nag-leads. Through surprise attacks or ambuscades, and with the support of the town people, including many of the elites, the war lasted longer than expected. Many Filipino officers were involved to fight with the renewed enthusiasm. They took advantage of cooperative attitude of the wealthy Filipinos to help the people in the resistance. Faced the effective guerrilla warfare, Americans used cruel methods to persuade the Filipinos to cooperate with them. For example, they used the water cure on many Filipinos to punish or extract information to them. These forms of torture was done by forcing water into the stomach of the person until it's filled. So, torture kaayo good. Then, the person would be made to lie on his back and the American soldier would jump to his stomach, and other torture was placing a rope around the person's neck and twisting it choke him. So, wala po sila kaluoy. Still, another form of torture was beating a victim until he became blue on his face. In summer, the American was also restored the massacre to avenge to death their comrades who were killed by the Filipino guerrillas under the command of General Vicente Lucban. The Americans also burned the whole town of Balangiga and killed all men and even boys over 10 years old. The Americans burned houses, the blocked food from the getting to guerrillas, reconcentrated fevers were diseases like cholera and malaria reached epidemics. Many surrendered because they could not take any more of these brutalities. So next is the capture of Aguinaldo. With the help of a Spaniard, Lazaro Segovia, who joined the Filipino forces against the Americans, Colonel Frederick Funston planned the capture of Aguinaldo. The Spaniard leads some men from Macabibi and pretend to have captured some American soldiers. They walked to Palanan and informed Aguinaldo through courier that they were bringing in the American captives. Aguinaldo was happy to hear the news and made preparation for the soldier who had captured the enemy. When Segovia arrived in the house where Aguinaldo was staying, he and his men signaled to their comrades to start firing. When Aguinaldo rushed to the window to see what was happening, Funston and his men told Aguinaldo to surrender. It was useless. he said. The whole house was surrendered. And then Aguinaldo was brought in Manila, where on April 1, 1901, he took the oath of allegiance to the government of the United States. In the proclamation of April 19, he appealed to the Filipino people to accept the sovereignty of the United States. So, amo ang pag-accept niya. So, the end of guerrilla warfare. Upon Aguinaldo's capture, many Filipino field commanders surrendered, while the wealthy Filipinos collaborated with Americans. However, there were still a few Filipinos generals who refused to give up the fight, like Simon Ola in Bicol, Roman Manalan in Pangasinan, and Zambales Manuel Tomines in Isabel, and many more. General Miguel Marvar of Batangas took over the leadership of the Filipino government and fought the enemy in running battles. He was so successful that the Americans tried to frighten the civilians population by concentrating them in a place where food supply was supposedly assured. To live outside the zone or zona meant to protection and ensure hunger. At this time, too, Reindeer peas killed over 90% of Carabaos. Thus, rice planting was greatly affected, causing a severe shortage of food. The Americans continued their police campaign against the guerrillas. On February 27, 1902, they captured General Vicente Lucban in Samar. This was the end of the guerrilla warfare in that province. 2 months later, on April 16, General Malvar surrendered in order to save his people from the brutality of the enemy from the hunger. So, nag-surrender na lang good sila for the good. With the surrender of General Malvar, systematic opposition to American sovereignty increased. It is true that here and there, as in the case of Macasilhig, patriots refused to surrender, but at this point, their effects on Americans was negligible. The guerrilla warfare was crushed. So next is pacifying the ladrones, non-Christians, and Moro people. Despite of the official declaration of the war by President Theodore Roosevelt on July 4, 1902, recent study point the continuation of the fight against the colonizer by political-religious groups called ladrones by the Americans, which means tribes and bandits. Composed of poor and uneducated peasants, this group continued to harass the newly organized Philippine Scot or the Filipinos now serving the U.S. Army. These groups who believe in the powers of prayers, rituals, and amulets or the anting-antings were not only anti-foreigners or fear Spanish and Americans, but also anti-casikas and landlords. Among them were the Samahans and Confradías of Rupitorios in Tayabas, Apo Epe Salvador in Bulacan, Pampanga, Nueva Ecija, Tarlac, and Pangasinan, Papa Aiso of Negros, who was greatly feared by the elite who welcomed the Americans and put up their own republic. There were also Polajanes in Cebu, are led by the Tabal brothers, Jos in Leyte, led by the Faustino Ablan and Papa Pablo in Samar. War was ended in these places piecemeal fashion from 1903 to 1913 using by the violent means. So the non-Christian Filipinos, like those in the Cordillera of Luzon and the Muslims in the Sulu Archipelago on the south, were pacified through the creation of two special provinces, the Moro Province in 1903 and the Mountain Province in 1908. In the Moro Province, however, warfare could continue the decade up to the 1916. The brutal military campaigns of the United States against them was revealed in the massacre at Budajo in 1906 in Sulu, where after 4 days of fighting, the United States forces suffered 20 casualties and 70 men wounded. So that's the end of our reporting. I hope you learned something about what we are saying or what we are tackle. So thank you for listening and thank you for watching this video. Again, we are the reporters.